Hello and welcome to the 19th episode of A Woman Robbed, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is, where we talk about actresses who may have come close to earning Oscar nominations, but were ultimately overlooked or omitted, or for one reason or another just didn't have the votes to make it into the final lineup, and discussing why they may have deserved to get in and why they ultimately didn't. Each episode has its own theme, and this week we are going to be covering two performances from the 90s that didn't earn Oscar nominations. And my guest today is a longtime favorite who you last heard talking with me about the 1993 Best Actress lineup. Now he's back to talk the 90s yet again for me from Next Best Picture. Welcome back to the show, Josh Parham.
Hello, hello.
Yes, we're back in the 90s. How do we feel about that?
In some days I feel like I'm glad we're out, but then other times maybe we should go back because
Maybe.
there's some baked in nostalgia there too that maybe I just want to return
Exactly.
to.
Yes, for both of us, I think. Yes, but we'll get into more of that in a little bit. First off, I presented to my patrons here at And the Runner-Up Is a list of 15 of the most notable performances of the 90s that weren't nominated, and the choices to recap were Angela Bassett in Waiting to Exhale, Kathy Bates in Dolores Claiborne, Juliette Binoche in Three Colors Blue, Toni Collette in Muriel's Wedding, Jodie Foster in Contact, Gong Li in Raise the Red Lantern, Pam Grier in Jackie Brown, Irene Jacob in Three Colors Red, Madonna in Evita, Julianne Moore in Safe, Michelle Pfeiffer in The Age of Innocence, Susan Sarandon in Stepmom, Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct, Kate Winslet in Heavenly Creatures, and Reese Witherspoon in Election. A lot of great snubs there, but the top vote getters were Pam Grier and Sharon Stone. This was a runaway victory for both of them. The patrons were fired up to hear us talk about these two. Next closest was Julianne Moore in Safe, with Reese Witherspoon in Election not too far behind, but very happy with what the patrons have chosen here. I think this is going to be a fun discussion. First of all, Josh, just wanted to talk about the 90s overall in film for you. What are your overall thoughts on this decade, specifically in film? Any specific trends or whatever you want to mention, your relationship to 90s, especially in Hollywood and for women in film?
Yeah, it's interesting because the 90s ultimately is where I get a lot of my initial interest in film. I was born in the 90s, so that entire decade is my childhood. So just my introduction to movies, not even as like an art form, just as something to watch and be entertained by. A lot of it is shaped in that decade. And obviously, the first wave is a lot of mainstream Hollywood fare, a lot of action stuff that I come to really get invested in. But as I get older, I do kind of feel like it's a weird time where we still can have this mixture of the more blockbuster IP driven stuff, but there's also character movies that studios are making that are making lots of money. And wow, I wish we could kind of go back to that time period when something that was just a character study could make $100 million at the box office. And so I
Yeah.
do find that still to be really interesting, the fact that studios were putting their weight behind that. And I think that did lead to a lot of interesting stories that even centered on women.
Mm-hmm.
I think not every year of the 90s was consistent in that, and
Yeah.
might be one of those inconsistencies the year that we're going to talk about, or with
I
one of
know.
them. But
Mm-hmm.
I do think that overall, I find it fascinating. It's a really interesting mixture of stories that all came from the mainstream too, which is so fascinating about it. You don't really get that diversity has seemed to be lost today. So
Yeah.
it's a decade that has highs and lows, but I'm incredibly fascinated by it.
Yeah, I think that's true of most decades, but yes, how soon this, like you said, the character studies making money, how soon that would disappear. If only we could go back to that. But yeah,
Yeah.
90s, super fun decade for me. As a fellow 90s kid, I certainly have a lot of fondness and nostalgia for this era. This just feels like one of those like peak consumerism times, especially for
Yes.
film. Like, Blockbuster was all the rage and the home video market was kind of surging, I think, at this point. And it was definitely a return to the big event filmmaking, certainly, with Titanic being one of the biggest. And we had also this huge surge in indie filmmaking, too, as something that was definitely viable at the box office. So that was refreshing. And it feels like, it feels to me like a lot of lovers of specific genres were served pretty well. To your point, it felt very diverse in that way, which is what brings me to these two performances in films where we have one of the prime erotic thrillers that was a massive, massive box office success that certainly helped cement Sharon Stone as a star. And then with Jackie Brown, another sort of pulpy crime drama from Tarantino after Pulp Fiction. I think generally speaking, these are two of the most memorable performances of the 90s and so specific to the actresses themselves that it's like you can't really even imagine anyone else pulling off what they did. So always love when we have that convergence of actress and character that just feels so intertwined in that way.
Very like singular to these performers, as you say. Like there,
Yeah.
you could not imagine anybody else playing these roles.
Even though in the case of one of them, there were a lot of different names bandied
Yep.
about, the one we're about to talk about. That could have been a very different film and different experience watching the other actresses in that role. So,
Oh, yes, very, very different.
yes. But without further ado, I think we should get right into what we were just talking about there, which is Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct.
Did you kill Mr. Boz, Mr. Ramel?
I'd have to be pretty stupid to write a book about killing and then kill somebody the way I described it in my book. I'd be announcing myself as the killer. I'm not stupid.
We know you're not stupid, Mr. Ramel.
Maybe that's what you're counting on to get you off the hook.
Writing the book gives you an alibi.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? But the answer's no. I didn't kill him.
So I've talked about Sharon Stone, of course, on the 1995 episode because of her nomination for Casino, so I'm not going to do a full introduction again, but this is 3 years before Casino, and like I said, it's a true star-making moment for Sharon. Her breakthrough was in 1990 with Total Recall, but this is really what launched her into superstar status. So there were a lot of actresses in the mix to potentially play this character of Catherine Trammell, but a lot of them either they weren't accepted or they turned it down outright. We had people like Kim Basinger, Meg Ryan, Julia Roberts, Greta Scacchi, Deborah Winger, she's always in the mix, Mariel Hemingway, Ellen Barkin, Kathleen Turner, Michelle Pfeiffer, Gina Davis, Demi Moore, the list goes on and on. But Sharon really wanted the role, and she also had that previous relationship with the director, Paul Verhoeven, from Total Recall. So Michael Douglas, her co-star, was initially quite hesitant because Sharon was not a star at that time per se, and he wanted someone of equal A-list talent to be his co-star. But obviously she proved everybody wrong, and it worked out in the end. So Basic Instinct is an erotic thriller about a police detective named Nick, played by Michael Douglas, who is investigating the murder by ice pick of a retired rock star. The main suspect is Catherine Trammell, Sharon Stone, a crime novelist who was the rock star's girlfriend and had written a similar killing in one of her books. So when she's brought in for questioning, she playfully taunts the detectives and says enough to be let go, but still raises suspicions for Nick, who is also becoming increasingly attracted to her. We also see how Catherine has a girlfriend who becomes jealous when Catherine starts to conduct an affair with Nick, and after more bodies pile up around them, their relationship just gets messier and messier. So, yes, let's talk Sharon Stone as an actress. Thoughts on Sharon overall and her huge moment here with Basic Instinct?
I love Sharon Stone. She's one of those actors that no matter what, just goes for it. And even if the material doesn't require her to put in that much effort, I'm happy for her to do it all the same, because at least she will always be the most interesting thing about a movie. And I think you can certainly say the same thing about this film, which, the character itself that she's playing, it's an archetype that you can kind of understand. The movie is basically a noir, and you can see her as the femme fatale, only modernized in the way that only Paul Verhoeven can, in his very like elevated sleaze way, for sure.
Yes.
But I do find her to be so fascinating. Like, I think she is hindered a bit by the writing, because like I think there's only so much you can do with a character that is intentionally shrouded in mystery, but she plays with that so well. Like, you understand why everybody is interested in her. She is aloof, but has this world that's just behind her eyes that you're just constantly trying to figure out with all the other characters. And that's an aura that she has always been able to play so beautifully. And even in this film, which is not high art in any regard, she is still amazing and so captivating to watch.
Yes, she is. Yeah. This is one of those performances for me that is truly like a lightning in a bottle moment. And I can't imagine how excited like Paul Verhoeven was to see what Sharon was able to do with this role as they were filming, just recognizing what he had here and how she is just having so much fun with that classic icy femme fatale role with the sultry voice and the very confident posturing she has, like even like when she's questioned at the beginning, just that sort of enigmatic smiling and the way she is deliberately withholding information. It's just, you really do want to lean in and know everything about this bizarre alien almost woman. And she just feels to me very fully formed, even when you don't know a lot about her. And her frankness, I think, is really fun to watch, especially with how clearly she has no fear of being caught, because she kind of just trusts her instincts to get out of whatever these detectives are going to try to get out of her. Like, you know, she seems to be kind of like perversely enjoying them questioning her, and she knows how disarming she is. Like when they ask like if she was dating the guy who was killed, and she immediately is just like, I wasn't dating him, I was fucking him. Just, you know, no hesitation there. Feels like she's already like anticipated this line of questioning and the sort of cat and mouse game of it all in a very sociopathic way. And I feel like we didn't have much of that even when this, you know, erotic thriller phase was happening in Hollywood. This felt very fresh at the time, but I do think it still generally does hold up.
And the other great thing about it too with her performance is that a lot of times I think you would normally fall back on this idea that she knows everything. You know, she's playing with people because she has a very well constructed plan that she's following and she's manipulating people, but in pursuit of that. I never really get the feeling like she has a plan. She feels very much, as you said, going on instinct and improvising. But that's what makes her all the more dangerous, is that you kind of don't
Yep.
know what to expect from her because she doesn't know what her next move is going to be. She's sort of going with the flow, but can be so on top of manipulating people's emotions that it makes her even more of a compelling figure. And
Yeah.
that's a more subtle thing to play at that I think she does it beautifully in every scene in the film. Like, yeah, you don't know about a ton about her, but you always want to know more at the same time.
Yeah. And you kind of perversely want her to get away with things the more and more she gets through this. Yeah, I think, you know, the movie itself may not be as good as her performance, but I feel like she just seems to very clearly know on an intimate level what kind of movie she's in, and she is living up to that and then some. But she is also really just Sharon herself, making a real effort to prove herself to be capable of this. She knows this is going to be huge for her, and I think that knowledge partly does inform the performance in a great way. Like if this were Demi Moore or Michelle Pfeiffer or Deborah Winger or whoever else was in the mix, I feel like we as an audience already have that relationship with them by that point in 1992. And I think maybe the surprise factor of what she does wouldn't be quite there, which is sort of like what, you know, Eric Anderson and I were discussing with Rosamund Pike in Gone Girl, for example. That's another one where the lack of prior knowledge maybe did just benefit her and her effectiveness there.
Yeah, the surprise factor definitely, I think, does influence how you feel about that performance. And yeah, she knows the movie she's in. She knows that she's in a Paul Verhoeven film, you
Yes.
know. And I love Verhoeven, but like I also understand the types of movies that he was interested in making. And there is, as I said up top, kind of an elevated sleaze to the material that he always is attracted to. And I find the same thing here. And oftentimes I kind of feel like she is the only one who like really knows how to play into that tone. Because like I feel like Michael Douglas, this is sort of one in a series of movies that he kind of
Yep.
did, and it sometimes feels a little bit on autopilot from him. And
Mm-hmm.
whenever he's with her, like even his scenes become better. Like everything just becomes more intensified when she walks into the room, and you have to figure out exactly what her intentions are in every scene. And I love that about the character. You know, it's sort of a different skill set for an actor because it's not like you're trying to create a fully formed character necessarily out of the material that you're given, or at least what we see, but it is in a genre exercise that I still find to be so engaging because I want to know every little bit of layer there is to this character. And I think she is doing that even more than the script is. Like, I think that the pull I have is really down to what she's doing because she's going so kind of not even like necessarily big or hyperbolic. It's just really fine tuned to the tone that works so well with the film. And I'm so interested in her whenever she's on screen.
Yes, I think she rides that line very well between that sort of campy, just having a lot of fun with this, but also clearly has done a lot of character work within
Yeah,
that as well.
yeah, absolutely. Because like there's that moment after her girlfriend is killed and he goes
Yes.
to see her and she's like actually broken up about it. And
Yeah.
obviously, you're watching the movie and you're thinking, okay, it could be a ploy, she could be acting. But in the moment, I actually do sense a genuine heartbreak for her. Like that was a miscalculation on her part in terms of toying with people. And so, and it gives you a window that, yes, she is very cunning and she can be cold, but there is a bit of humanity there too that you're still kind of questioning yourself, like the genuineness of it. But the fact that she's able to showcase that also feels kind of rare in these types of movies and for these types of characters. And I think that she is able to draw that out very naturally. And it just is another element of what makes her performance all the more interesting.
Yes, I completely agree. And I've only seen this movie, I think, one or maybe two times before, and I actually forgot about that particular scene and what she does in it. And I was like, this is like a very interesting wrinkle within this because we're so used to her just playing everybody, and we're almost expecting her to be like, oh, this is like a different kind of way I'm going to manipulate Nick. But also, it's like, is that the case? Is this actually the one glimpse we get into some actual vulnerability from her? And I just love that we don't actually know, even by the end of the movie, really.
Yeah, you don't know, but you still care. And that's the important
Yes,
thing.
that's
It's like
true.
you may not have the exact answer as to whether or not this is a genuine moment from her, but the fact that she was able to show it at all, I feel like is something we don't normally get to see, at least not in a way that is so believable. Like I think we get moments in other types of these movies where there is the more vulnerable moment, but it is not played with as much sincerity as it is with this movie.
Right. Yes. I think we should also, of course, talk about the infamous interrogation scene.
Yes, yes.
Often parodied, but never equaled, I would say. Um, I love the way she completely just weaponizes her sexuality there and is intentionally trying to disarm them by talking so openly about, sex and coke and having sex on coke. And again, she just seems to have thought of every possible response to their questioning with enough kind of plausible deniability, but she's also carrying herself in such a like smart ass, arrogant way with like this swagger that does make you want to see her outsmart them. And in that respect, it does feel like a very self-aware performance where she is just choosing her words and her pauses very carefully, but without making it seem too calculated either. And she knows what effect she's having on the audience as much as the other characters in the film, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's another one of those moments where she just takes command and has total control of everybody in that room. And to the point where, yes, the whole uncrossing the legs moment is iconic and we know
Mhm.
it as the singular, like most influential scene from this movie, but it almost kind of undercuts the power of the rest of the moment actually for me because it is so shocking that it sort of feels a little incongruous to the other stuff that she's doing because I think that her just dialogue that she's having back and forth is way more impactful than that particular moment that to me just kind of comes across as shock value. And
Yeah.
I think that I know it's there to rile everybody else up in that room and get them off their game, but I think she was doing enough of that with just the verbal sparring. I think that was far more effective in terms of communicating to me the intelligence of this woman and how cunning she is, rather than this particular moment that, yes, catches us all off guard, but it to me is not as effective as the precision strikes that were happening before. That's the sledgehammer strike. And to me, not as
Mhm.
effective and not as emblematic of the other great things about her performance in that scene.
Yeah, and definitely overshadows everything else she's doing
Yeah.
to have that moment. Yeah, it reminds me of another film from 1992, which did a similar shock moment in The Crying Game, actually.
Yeah.
So,
I can see that.
yeah, so interesting stuff going on in 1992. But yes, I agree that the way she just kind of modulates and just builds up like that, almost like foreplay, is so
Yeah.
much more tantalizing ultimately than what is actually shown, which, as we know, she didn't actually think was going to happen.
Yeah.
So that is very unfortunate, because I feel like we should have just trusted her and her impact in what she was saying to communicate all of that without having to actually just see it outright. So
Yeah, but that's what you get when you work with Paul Verhoeven in the 90s.
sure, yes. I don't know what I was expecting, I guess, but
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I just love watching the way that she manipulates Nick as well, because she just obviously is like asking these very personal questions about this thing in his past where he had this accidental homicide, and just saying all these very specific details that the public definitely doesn't know, like about him being on coke when it happened, and how his wife knew what he did and she ended up killing herself and all that. And it rattles him, not only for what she's saying, but like the way that she's saying it too, and saying it with such authority, and like also coming on to him at the same time and getting very breathy with her approach. And I just feel like so much of this could have been very silly and cartoonish and mustache twirling in a bad way, to the point of not really taking her seriously necessarily, but it's just in the way that she conducts herself. There is such a fire in her eyes that's just really delicious, and it's not subtle at all, but it's not one note either. Like, she really works her way up to driving him kind of wild in a way. Like, it's again like that verbal foreplay, and then she just goes in for the kill.
Yeah, because it's not a mustache twirling villain to a certain degree.
Yeah.
She does
Of course.
very much lay it on kind of thick in a lot of places, but
Yes.
it's a way that works for the tone. Like as
Yeah.
you said, it is playing to a very high register, but that's what the movie is. She understands that this is what the character is supposed to be. And yeah, those moments, like I even love when she's got all the newspapers out from the very specific times that mention him, to just again to kind of put him off of his game a bit. And yeah, the way that she doesn't give in, she doesn't match his frustration at all. She plays it very calm. And in the moments where she has to get more emotional, you do feel a calculation there too. But it's not to the detriment of her performance. It doesn't feel like it is so calculated that there's not an actual person there too. There is that bit of improv, as I said, that instinct that she's working off of, that makes it fresh in every moment and unpredictable. And it's why she's so good in the movie. It is not something that anybody would say is like high art, but it works so perfectly for this material, and it shows you why she's so great at being an actress.
Yes. And what you just said is probably a preview of what we'll talk about with why she didn't get nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's not regarded as a high art performance or movie, but I'll save more of my thoughts on that later. Thank you for listening to this preview of A Woman Robbed, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup-is and become a patron. Only $3 a month will get you access to bonus episodes and early access to regular episodes. Thank you so much for your consideration.